Transgenerational trauma. So what is that? And how do we work with it? Why is it important? So, as the name implies, intergenerational or transgenerational trauma is trauma which is somehow passed down from generation to generation. Now, there may be some people just kind of going, well, that sounds like a load of nonsense, and they've already turned off. Well, I'm sorry if I missed you, but for those that are still listening, there's good evidence now, and I'm going to quote a really important study by someone called Ressler back in 2013. And what they did was some experiments which really proved that transgenerational trauma exists. I won't bore you with the minutiae of it, but what they did was that they did a sort of Pavlov's dogs type conditioning of monkeys to cherry blossom, which they like and the smell of, but they gave electric shocks to these monkeys whilst they were smelling the cherry blossom, and they fairly soon began to exhibit stress physiology instead of pleasurable physiology. And we would say, well, there's no great surprise there, because that's the work of Pavlov in the past, and conditioned responses. But the fascinating thing is that 3 generations later, in the absence of any further electrical shock stimulus, when the 3rd generation down, the great-great-grandchildren of these monkeys, were given and exposed to the smell of cherry blossom, they exhibited stress physiology. So that's really fascinating. So they've learned and conditioned that the smell of cherry blossom is not pleasurable, but it equates to danger. Now, what are the implications of that for us? Well, I can tell you in my work, there have been occasions where it becomes very apparent and quite clear that what we're working with is something which has come from black slave trade, and fairly commonly from Holocaust survivors and victims of great global atrocities. We say, well, what do you do about that? Well, the same as anything, and really trauma isn't about what happened, but it's about how it is received in the body and how it remains in the body. And so we can work with that when it shows up. And sometimes it's not clear, and sometimes we don't need to know. But sometimes if it becomes clear and it becomes apparent, then we can still work with the physiological responses and embodied responses of that in the here and now. And then we're breaking the cycle, we're breaking the pattern. I think it's fascinating, really, that there's some evidence that this is being transmitted through the DNA. And in the realm of epigenetics, we know that actually allows hope for change, But actually, anybody who says that's just the way I am, well, there's a degree of enlightenment possibly in that, of kind of going, well, I really do know I am. Well, unless you're about 85 years old and you've spent your entire life in really conscious awareness, then I think that's unlikely, because most of us don't really know who we are until we've done an awful lot of deep diving. And we're a constantly evolving thing. So I think just the way I am, because I respond in that way, there's a reason maybe that you feel that way, yeah? And maybe that's worth looking at. And so transgenerational trauma is, I think, probably inevitably evident in all of us, because we all have ancestry, yeah? But some of us have greater traumatic familial history than others. And probably none of us really know what our ancestry went through if we go back a few generations. But it's there. Some of that shapes who we are in really positive ways, and some of it leaves a legacy of pain and suffering. But the good news is we can do something about that, and we can work with it when we know what we're doing.